This is the Multi-Orgasmic Millionaire Podcast, the only sex podcast for 7- and 8-figure conscious leaders who want to embody their pleasure and to have the best sex of their lives. I'm Tilly Storm, top 20 sex coach in the world, and your host today. All right, loves, I am very excited to share with you the episode today about my journey to embodying my inner sex goddess as told from a 2023 perspective as opposed to a 2017 perspective. There are a bunch of new people listening to the podcast now, and I imagine not so many that were in the beginning are still listening, and so many new people, and I haven't shared my story about why I do what I do on my own podcast in so long that I thought it was a good time to do that. Now that we have a turn of a new year and we're all kind of reflecting on things from the past and how we want to move forward with our intentions for the year. So I would say that over the past 5 years, 3 or 4, I guess we'll find out what the fourth one is as I speak them, but the biggest changes and transformations that I have gone through that have shifted my story and changed my story since starting the podcast on November 30th, 2017 are these. The first is having done relationship trauma resolution. The second, as a result of all of that, having started a partnership with my man Christopher Jolly since June of 2020. And changing my name would be number 3 in January of 2020. And then certainly last but not least, having done plant medicines and psychedelics with ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms since March of 2022. So for those of you that are new here, I became a sex coach because I had been on my own journey of healing my embarrassment around my body and my sexuality, the inability to have an orgasm in more than one way that really annoyed me and bothered me and made me feel limited in my sexual expression. And I had heard about the jade egg from a friend of mine and had gotten one, had been gifted one, and I had also been gifted a jade egg course that I took. And once I started the jade egg practice, I became multi-orgasmic within 2 months of doing the practice regularly. I cleared so much shame and guilt around my body and my sexuality that I'd grown up with from being raised Southern Baptist. And it just shifted everything about my sexuality, what I was able to experience. I then went and learned Tantra with my partner at the time, which was completely mind-boggling and really expanded me into a whole new world of, the kind of thing like you don't know until you know. Well, learning Tantra was definitely that for me and my partner at the time. And it really expanded me into what was even possible with my sexuality. I had also been working at a birth center at the time as a doula and a midwife apprentice. I used to be a doula and a midwife apprentice for 7 years in a town called Lafayette, Louisiana. I am from South Louisiana, a little town named Covington. It's just north of New Orleans. You might hear the accent every now and then. You probably heard it a lot earlier on because it tends to shift and change as, depending on where I'm at in the world. I don't live in Louisiana anymore, so I think it's a little better than it used to be. But anyway, so I was a doula and midwife for a while. I had actually gone to pre-med school to be a doctor. I wanted to be an OBGYN, and I never passed the MCAT. I suck at standardized tests, and I got a really terrible score. I got a 19, and I did it both times, and that was after studying for it with the Kaplan course and paying thousands of dollars to learn how to get a better MCAT score. I had a great GPA in school, but standardized tests were just not my jam. And I never could get into med school. I never even tried because the scores were so low. They basically don't even look at you unless you have a 25. So I didn't even try. And then it kind of left me wondering, well, what the heck am I supposed to do now? I just spent 4 years of my life studying to be this one thing, and there's nothing else I want to do. Well, this happened to be the time when the housing market was about to collapse, and I ended up going to get a master's degree in environmental science because that was a really hot topic at the time, and everyone was talking about the job growth opportunity there, and I just wanted a freaking job out of college, So I went and did that, and that was totally worthless. I'd never used that degree in my entire adult life. I've never used it. But from there, I ended up getting a job as a city planner. And that was the only job I could get. It took a year to find a job at the time because the economy was totally tanked. This was in 2008. And that's also the time when I had my firstborn, whose birthday is today, actually. It's January 10th. So he's 15 years old now. And from his birth, that was like the start of a huge awakening for me. That's when I really began to question everything about my body and my sexuality. It's when I had like a spiritual experience through that birth. I remember looking down on myself, onto my body. It was an out-of-body experience in a way because my consciousness was up there looking down on myself, and I think it was the first time in my life that I was ever able to separate my consciousness from my body and to experience them as two separate things. To experience the body as a thing that is born and dies, but to experience consciousness as something that is never born and never dies. And that was the start of my personal growth and development journey, which has taken me so far and wide to many, many places. From that birth, I started doing yoga, meditation. I read like every personal growth and development book in the library at the time. And it wasn't until 2015 that I started to dive into my sexuality. So that's when I did the Jade Egg program, and then late 2015 or early 16, I started to learn Tantra and do tantric sex practices with my partner at the time. And then it was July 2016 when my Tantra teacher had announced that she was going to be doing a coaching training for sex, love, and relationship coaching. And having been at the birth center, I recognized so many women who struggled with their sexuality after having children. And while it lack of desire, lack of libido was not something that I personally struggled with, I noticed that there was a huge problem with it. So that's when I was like, oh my God, this is what I'm here to do with my life. This is what I was born to do. I love being a doula and a midwife, but the lifestyle did not suit my desires for my life. I wanted travel freedom. I wanted to be a nomad eventually. I mean, I had children, so I knew there was an extent to that was possible, but I knew I did not want to live in Lafayette, Louisiana forever, and I definitely didn't want to be on call forever. Y'all, I suck at staying awake late. I am a very early morning person, and I sleep a lot too. I get 9 hours every single night. My boyfriend makes fun of me and says I always sleep 12 hours. That's not true. Don't listen to him. It's more like 9. And I just couldn't maintain the midwifery lifestyle. It was too much on call, too much being locked down to a particular place. And I wanted to be able to travel. And I was like, oh my God, coaching. Yes. So I signed up for the coaching training, and it was a 600-hour sex, love, and relationship training. And I ended up doing specialties in men's sexuality, the Jade Egg, tantric sex, and relationship transformation. And I started this podcast at the very end of the training in November 2017. And you'll hear that if you go back to the very first episode, my name was not Tilly Storm, it was Lacey Broussard. So that brings me to the next stage of the journey. And this is where it begins to really veer and take on a deeper meaning and depth of the story than it did back then. So back then, I would say that I was really driven by sex and having great sex and making sure that sex was amazing. I think I was more of reclaiming my inner slut back then than I was my inner sex goddess, which was perfect and beautiful and amazing at the time. But it was also kind of rooted in a sexual shadow, which when we were talking about erotic blueprints, Jaya's work, I've talked about several times, many, many times on this podcast, but I'm a sexual and an energetic blueprint. And as a sexual blueprint, we tend to have a shadow side of like sex is very much like this. It's penis and vagina or whatever it is for you, but it's very much about the orgasm. It's very much a visual. It's like the stereotypical way that men experience their sexuality is kind of what the sexual blueprint is. And that was me. That was me back then. While I was like opening myself up to the energetics of sex, I still wasn't fully able to experience all that is available to me now. I was searching for that and really opening up different channels and different ways to connect to source and to energy and awaken Kundalini inside of me, but it wasn't fully rooted yet. So I still had that sexual shadow piece kind of running the show. That was over 5 years ago now. And since then, when I started the podcast, I was actually in the middle of a breakup divorce with my ex-husband. And it was a really tragic ending to the relationship, which, to protect his story, I don't share that publicly about why we separated, but it was not fun for either of us. It just kind of like had to happen sort of thing. So we ended up having to separate and we sold the house. And I was left with 2 small children who were too young to leave at home by themselves. I had driven Uber for a year on the weekends as I was going through sex, love, and relationship coaching training. I wasn't making much money. As a doula, it's maybe $20,000 a year or so. And I was also driving Uber to help bring in income for our family because we had had a sudden loss of income at the time. So upon selling the house, I had about $2,000 to my name. Part of the situation was very much rooted in finances about why we had to separate. And I had gone into a lot of debt to try and keep things afloat. And unfortunately, we just couldn't maintain, continuing to live together and trying to feed 4 children. I had 2 stepchildren at the time. So we separated and I moved to New Orleans. And that's when I was a single mom for 2.5 years. And I was really focused on helping moms in particular reignite their sexual desire after having children, teaching them the jade egg practice, which is something that was so near and dear to my heart because it completely changed how I viewed myself and my self-love and how I experienced my body, how I felt in my body, how I felt about my sexuality, and just completely expanded my sexuality. So I taught in that realm for a while and coached clients one-on-one for a long time. And then about a year in, I had a lot of success right off the bat financially. I was really making it. After not being able to drive for Uber anymore, I was kind of forced to do or die, make it or break it and then go live with your parents. And that was not an option for me. So there were absolutely months where I would wonder, I have no idea how I'm going to make it this month. I have no idea how I'm going to make it this month. And every month I would, and I would get amazing clients and, everything would just seem to work out. So it took several years of me building trust in myself and building trust in myself as a business owner and knowledge about how to run a business. And about a year in, I started a group coaching program, the Essentially Embodied Woman. And that one you've probably heard me talk about a lot if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, because for 2.5 years, it was like my signature program. And that's what I would put people through who were just starting and wanted to reclaim their sexuality and begin to expand their sexuality. And it got amazing results for clients. And within that time, I had also met my partner after doing about a year of relationship trauma resolution myself. After getting divorced and separating from my ex-husband, it was very traumatizing. I was not okay for a while. I definitely remember calling up a friend one day and being like, okay, can I really do this? Am I mentally sane? Because I'm not sure that I am. My mental health was definitely in the tanks. I didn't have a lot of self-confidence, even though externally it probably seems like I did. But energetically, some people probably felt that I didn't, and I really didn't, because it was such a blow to my identity at the time. I was really rooted in that identity of being a mom, having 2 stepkids and 2 kids of my own, and, my husband making most of the money. And, I just did what I wanted and I followed my desires. And then all of a sudden it was me responsible for everything. And like, oh my goodness. So it was a huge transition and it was not easy. And hopefully I did it with some grace and it didn't scar my children too bad, but such is life. Yeah, so doing relationship trauma resolution was one of the deepest journeys I've ever been on, other than doing psychedelics and plant medicines. And it was very akin to doing psychedelics and plant medicines. I would say that I got just as much out of doing the trauma resolution as I have psychedelics. Very different, but also very similar in the way that they get you in touch with the core of who you are. They help you to both the trauma resolution coaching and the psychedelics help you remember your wholeness. They get you back in touch with that core inside of you that's unbreakable. And that was so healing and important for me to establish myself as an expert in my field after having gone through such a traumatic ending to a relationship. All of a sudden starting a business around relationships and sex. So there really wasn't that much imposter syndrome going on. I honestly felt pretty solid there. People have asked me, like, did you have imposter syndrome? Like, you just, got divorced from your husband and you're teaching people about relationships and how to have better relationships. Like, no, because a lot of what happened in our relationship, it wasn't in my control. And it was really tragic. So, sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles and there's not much you can do about it. There was definitely an acceptance of like, well, the ending of my relationship, it wasn't because I sucked at relationships or sex. It's just because shit happens sometimes. And who knows why, but eventually we get more of a bird's eye perspective as to why, and we see why things had to happen the way that they did. And we gain that perspective. So getting back to relationship trauma resolution, after feeling really solid about healing my own patterns around relationship and feeling that, I was very sexuality driven for a while and, reclaiming my inner slut because I had never had the opportunity to do that. I never did that as a young woman. I never did that in college. My first baby was born when I was 23. I met his dad when I was 18 and we'd been together since I was 18. So there was really never any time for me to mess around and have fun. And that was really my time to do that. And it was fun. It was great. I don't regret it, but I was also ready to attract a partner. And doing the trauma resolution work absolutely helped me to do that. So eventually I met my man Chris in June 2020, right after the pandemic started. And we really created a bond over shared values and shared opinions about what was going on in the world. And from the very beginning of the pandemic, I was someone who really saw through it. I had a huge shift around what I thought and believed politically was going on. I don't like to pick sides, but I kind of woke up to some greater truths about the world that I wasn't aware of prior to that. And my partner was someone who also kind of knew these things already and was seeing from more of a bird's eye perspective what was happening in the world, what was happening in human consciousness, what was happening in humanity as a whole. And we really bonded over those things. So being in a pandemic dating time, it was hard for a lot of people, but we definitely found love in the time of the corona. And we did a podcast episode on how we met and all that stuff. That was on Valentine's Day 2021. So you can scroll back and listen to that if you want to hear our story of getting together. And ever since we've been together, I've definitely developed more of I'd say, an integration of my own sexual shadow coming out. So like I said, the sexual shadow from the erotic blueprints terminology and language and how they talk about it and everything is that everything is all about the orgasm. It's all about how many times a week do we have sex and really all about the end goal. And me entering into a relationship, it was like a leveling out of my sexual shadow and into more of a grounded person that I feel that I am today, and really embodying more queen energy and feeling more solid in who I am and in my identity, and caring more about the quality of my relationship and the legacy that I want to be leaving for my children. I'm way more concerned about these things now than I was back then, even just 2.5 years ago. I'd say that now I think in much longer terms than I used to. It used to be like living client to client and paycheck to paycheck. And now my perspective, as I've become more grounded and settled in my relationship and what I want to create for my future, it's so much more broad. And also, I would say that the plant medicine experiences and doing psychedelics for the first time were also a big part of creating legacy and figuring out what is it that I'm really here to leave, because I'm already living my purpose. I'm already living a dream job that most people would kill for. I already get to do the things that I want to do in terms of like how I help people in the world and living my purpose, living a nomad life for a year, which we did after I took my kids out of a public charter school back in December 2020. Yeah, so I took them out of school in December 2020. I hired a private teacher for them, and I had the private teacher until November 2022. And that's when we were living in Costa Rica for a while. We had been in Colombia, we had been in Mexico, we were traveling all over basically, and trying to find a place to settle down. And with 2 children, it was pertinent for them. You know, they experienced a bit of a rough time traveling for a while, but they also look back on it fondly, which is interesting because while it was happening, they didn't seem too ecstatic or excited about the fact that they got to travel and do all these fun things. Like, we've been to all of the amazing sites in Mexico, the historic sites, all of the Mayan ruins and the temples, and seen so many things, and went and swam with whale sharks and snorkeling and all of it. And at the time, they didn't really appreciate it, but now they look back on it and see it fondly. So we had a really great time just world schooling, basically. They were learning basics with their teacher, and all of that was good. And then we decided to settle down in Florida after finding a Montessori school, a high school, that they could go to, because one of my kids is now in 9th grade and the other is in 7th. So I knew that I wanted to find a school that they could go to for the duration of their time in school. And we landed on the place that they're at now, which has been awesome. So my journey to embodying my sex goddess now in 2023 versus 2017 has taken on a very different flavor. For now, it's more about how I've quit chasing shiny objects, and I just decided that I'm good enough, that I'm perfect and whole as I am, and the plant medicines have helped more than anything to get me to that realization that there's nothing else to become, there's nothing else to do or be, that I just get to be me, and that's all there is to it. And I get to show up how I want to, embodying my sexiness and showing up as the goddess that I am, as the queen that I am, in any way, shape, and form in my life. Now it's less about trying to fix myself or prove myself, because I've already proven myself. I've already created a successful business, a 6-figure plus business. I've already provided for my children in a way that I never imagined I would be able to before, in terms of them going to a very expensive private school. And I've already proven that I can do all the things that I wanted to do. Like, I set out after being fired for breastfeeding my children from my city planning job right after having my second child. I had made that commitment that I would never work for anyone else in my life, and that I would find a way to make money doing something that I love doing, and I would show my kids that it's possible. And 15 years later, check box, mission complete. So it's like, after proving yourself and showing yourself that you can do this, you know, with several years of wondering if I could do it, and then actually doing the thing, it's like, oh, there's a whole nother world out here. There's one where I don't have to strive. I don't have to be in the survival mode all of the time, that I can actually just relax, enjoy myself, and be more of me and show up as more of me. So that's more of what I've been getting to embody this year, from this more grounded place with wisdom underneath my belt, with having hundreds of clients now underneath my belt, and having helped facilitate transformation for literally hundreds of men and women, and seeing what works and what doesn't, and having gotten to play with my skills and abilities and find what I like to do and figure out my own methods, and to create my own methods and my own systems of how I support people and change and transformation. So that's how I have arrived to embodying my inner sex goddess. And how it's so much different. So now that you've heard this, go back and listen to that first episode. Actually, I'm never going to encourage anyone to go listen to the first episode because it's like embarrassing. I didn't even have a mic until episode 91 or something like that. Do it at your own risk. All right. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to my story. I encourage you to share it with any of your friends that you know could feel inspired by listening to my journey. Thank you so much for joining me. And just a quick reminder that the Epic Sex New Year bonuses, part of the way that I have now figured out that I love to work with people is by working with individuals separately, which I've always said. So even if you go back tons of episode on the podcast, you'll hear me talk about how I only work with individuals before I'll work with a couple. Well, I've proven this rule to be a really great rule. So working with individuals and then working with a couple is how I have found works the best to create epic sex in a relationship when there hasn't been sex for a while, when the passion and the chemistry is burned out over time. So if that is you, and that is something that you are wanting to make a priority this year in 2023, then I have the Epic Sex New Year bonuses. There are only 2 left. There were 4, but you missed out on the first 2 if you haven't applied and signed up already. I have 4 spots left. One of the spots has been taken of the 5 that I originally had. So there are 4 spots left for Sex Goddess 5 Months to Total Freedom in the Bedroom private coaching with me. And this is where I'm going to work with the woman first. And then at the end, about halfway through, we might bring in your partner. If you have one, you definitely don't have to have one. But if you are in a relationship, bringing in your partner about halfway through is a really great way to do this. I've tested it. I've tried it out. This is what I found has been the most effective for people. So if you are interested in taking me up on any of the Epic Sex New Year bonuses, there are 2 left. The one that will go away on January 15th is my Get What You Want in Sex Communication Practice Set, so you can confidently speak your wants and desires and get them without arguing about it anymore. If you found yourself arguing about sex a lot in your relationship, this is going to be really helpful for you because you're going to learn the 5 steps to fun, easy, and successful sex talk, and you're going to receive holding space and communication training to resolve long-standing communication and connection issues so that you stop arguing about the thing you've been arguing about for years. And then the second bonus that is left and up for grab is the Epic Sex Date Night Blueprint. This is the done-for-you 10 audio and video guided sex date nights to ensure you never get stuck in a boring sexual routine again. So this is where I've given you different practices, a communication and connection practice that you're going to start with, then a sex practice, and a recap. And each of the date nights are about 45 minutes each, and they will give you all different flavors of sexuality, from creating a bondage scene together to tantric sex to pussy and penis massage. Oh my God, so many amazing things. So if you haven't checked out Sex Goddess 5 Months to Total Freedom in the Bedroom, I want to encourage you to do that at the link in the show notes and apply and get in before January 22nd when the last bonus, the Epic Sex Date Night Blueprint bonus, goes away as well. Thanks so much for joining me, my loves, and I'll share with you next week. Bye. Want to become an embodied sex goddess? Of course you do. Take the Sex Goddess quiz today and find out how. Click link in show notes or head to bit.ly/sex goddess quiz to get started.